Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, let's learn. Cool video. Where are you? There you are. Election season coming up. I believe, remember, the 5th of November is the day. This year. Preemptive like Veritasium. Why democracy is mathematically impossible. Interesting. My name's Connor. If you're new, original link to the video top of the description. Let's go.
Impossible. Democracy might be mathematically impossible.
Stay hydrated, guys.
This isn't a value judgment, a comment about human nature, nor a statement about how rare and unstable democratic societies have been in the history of civilization. Our current attempt at democracy, the methods we're using to elect our leaders, are fundamentally irrational. And this is a well-established mathematical fact.
I think democracy, I think it's probably a lot of flaws. I would say is the best. It's bad, but it's the best we have, I'd say. But it does seem like a lot of the history of democracy is more so about portraying yourself as democratic, but really behind the scenes having a bunch of mechanisms that make it so that, you know, the people in power are still really making the decisions. I think there are a lot of things that I don't want to be too pessimistic. Like I said, I'm not saying democracy is worse than, you know, some other way of running the country. But I do see, the more I learn about the history of democracy, a lot of just... I think the upper chamber of countries like the House of Lords or the Senate are a kind of good example of how, yeah, sure, proportional representation in the lower house, but it's got to be passed by the upper house. So, does that make sense? Am I wrong?
This is a video about the math that proved that fact and led to a Nobel Prize. It's a video about how groups of people make decisions and the pitfalls that our voting systems fall into. One of the simplest ways to hold an election is to ask the voters to mark one candidate as their favorite on a ballot. And when the votes are counted, the candidate with the most votes wins the election. This is known as first past the post voting. The name is kind of a misnomer though. There is no post that any of the candidates need to get past. The winner is just the candidate with the most votes. This method likely goes back to antiquity. It has been used to elect members of the House of Commons in England since the 14th century, and it's still a common voting system with 44 countries in the world using it to elect its leaders. 30 of these countries were former British colonies.
I was going to say, this looks a lot very similar to the map of the British Empire.
Using it to elect its leaders. 30 of these countries were former British colonies. The U.S.,
Australia,
being a former British colony, still uses first past the post in most of its states to elect their representatives to the Electoral College. But first past the post has problems. If you are selecting representatives in a parliament, you can and frequently do get situations where the majority of the country did not vote for the party that ends up holding the power. In the last 100 years, there were 21 times a single party held a majority of the seats in the British Parliament, but only 2 of those times did the majority of the voters actually vote for that party.
So a party which only a minority of the people voted for ends up holding all of the power in government. Another thing that happens because of first past the post is that similar parties end up stealing votes from each other.
The 2000 U.S. presidential election, which was an election essentially between Al Gore and George W. Bush. At that point, every state in the nation used first past the post to determine the outcome of the election. Bush had more votes in Florida, but by a ridiculously slim margin. It was fewer than 600 votes. But there was another candidate on the ballot, Ralph Nader. Nader was a Green candidate. He was certainly to the left of either Gore or Bush.
And what we need is the upsurge of citizen concern, people concern, poor, rich, or middle class, to counteract the power of the special interest.
And he got almost 100,000 votes in Florida.
I just don't know if I can, with a conscience, vote for Bush or Gore.
I will vote for Ralph Nader.
Most of those voters were devastated that by voting for Nader rather than Gore, they ended up electing Bush.
I don't see any problem with that so far, though. You voted for who you voted for. I don't see that so far as a reason to why it's bad. I mean,
this is what is called a spoiler effect. Almost all Nader voters preferred Gore to Bush, but in a first-past-the-post system, they had no way of expressing that preference.
But that's the risk you take when you vote, right? Am I crazy? Similar thing happened, right, with Teddy Roosevelt running, because I don't think he liked how Taft was kind of going against everything that Teddy Roosevelt thought he was doing. I think, Taft and Roosevelt were connected and similar. And so he ran in spite of him and ended up electing Wilson. But I don't see that as undemocratic. You vote for who you want to vote for. Whoever gets the most wins.
Of expressing that preference, because you could only vote for one candidate.
So first past the post incentivizes voters to vote strategically.
Say there are 5 parties. One of them will be the smallest one, and so they won't win. Why would you vote for them? This is also true if you have 4 parties or 3 parties. This winner-takes-all voting system leads to a concentration of power in larger parties, eventually leading to a 2-party system. This effect is common enough that it has a name: Duverger's Law.
So first past the post isn't a great option. So what else could we do?
Well, we can say that...
So it's ranked choice voting. Look, I understand the problem, but I also don't understand the problem, because it's your job as a voter to realize that, to look at all the candidates and be like, and logically vote that way. And if you still want to vote for the third party candidate, the spoiler effect, that's your right. And so you can't just complain when the guy who you really didn't want wins, and maybe you should have voted for the guy that you didn't like either but would prefer to the other guy. Well, that's the choice you have to make when you're in the voting booth. And if you say, you know what, no matter what, I'm still going with this third party guy, even if this vote, if it had gone to the lesser of the two evils that you see, might have gotten the lesser of the two evils elected if you didn't. But that's the logic that you put into voting. I see the problem, but I would also be okay with ranked choice voting. Is like, I want this guy, but okay, let's just keep going.
A candidate can only win an election if they get a majority, at least 50% plus 1 of the vote. But what if we hold an election and no one gets a majority?
Cut out the bottom
people
two.
Who voted for the candidate with the fewest votes and ask them to vote again, but choose a different candidate. And we could repeat this process over and over, eliminating the smallest candidate until one candidate reaches a majority. But holding many elections is a big hassle. So instead, we could just ask voters to rank their preferences from their favorite to their least favorite. And if their favorite candidate gets eliminated, we go to their second preferences. When the polls close, you count the voters' first choices. If any candidate has a majority of the votes, then they're the winner. But if no candidate has a majority, the candidate with the fewest votes gets eliminated, and their ballots are distributed to those voters' second preferences. And this keeps happening until one candidate has a majority of the votes.
I think that this is probably the most foolproof way of being able to choose of just like electing the person that most people would like to be elected if their top choices aren't chosen. I see this as logic. As a
This
good
is
idea.
mathematically identical to holding repeated elections. It just saves the time and hassle, so it's referred to as instant runoff.
But the system is also known as preferential voting or ranked choice voting. And instant runoff doesn't just affect the voters, it affects how the candidates behave towards each other.
It was the Minneapolis mayor's race, 2013. They were using ranked choice voting. The incumbent mayor had stepped down, and there were all of these people came out from the woodwork wanting to be mayor. There are 35 candidates. And so you would think if there's 35 candidates, you'd want to dunk on someone, you'd want to like kind of elbow yourself into the spotlight. That's not what happened. These 35 candidates, all of them were really nice to each other. They were all super cordial, super polite, to the degree that at the end of the final mayoral debate, they all came together and they sang Kumbaya together. Kumbaya, my Lord, Kumbaya. The amount of vitriol and anger and partisan, mudslinging that we're all used to see this vision of an actual kumbaya. It's not even a joke. All of these people getting along, so desperate for second and third choices from other people that they're like, I'm going to be the picture-perfect, kindest candidate possible.
That's a good idea. Yeah, so that like, even if voters who don't know you, you're nice to everyone. And like their guy might not make it, but you're like, oh, this guy is really nice to that candidate, I'll go him. The only thing with ranked choice voting is that I would make sure is the case is I think you shouldn't have to rank everyone. Okay. I think that if you know every candidate, you know a lot about every candidate and their policies, and you want to rank all of the choices, that should be allowed. But I think mandatory full ranking shouldn't be, because then you could end up placing your vote for someone that like you really didn't even know about, and it's just because your preferred candidate or candidates didn't make the cut that like you just go to them. So I think ranked choice voting is great, but you should be able to only fill out one if you want, or only rank 2 or 3. I think that would be the best system.
But there's also a problem with instant runoff. There can be cases where a candidate doing worse can actually help get them elected.
Let's say we have 3 candidates, Einstein, Curie, and Bohr. Now, Einstein and Bohr have very conflicting views, while Curie is ideologically in the center. So let's say Einstein gets 25% of the vote, Curie gets 30%, and Bohr gets 45%. No one got a majority, so it goes to the second round, with Einstein being eliminated, and because people who voted for Einstein put down Curie as their second choice, well, Curie ultimately gets elected. But now imagine that Bohr has a terrible campaign speech or proposes a very unpopular policy, so bad that some of his voters actually switch over to Einstein's side. Well, now it's Curie that gets eliminated. And because she's more moderate, half of her voters select Einstein and the other half select Bohr.
Wait, what?
Einstein's popular policy, so bad that some of his voters actually switch over to Einstein's side.
I mean, you already casted. Oh,
well, now it's Curie that gets eliminated. And because she's more moderate, half of her voters select Einstein and the other half select Bohr in the second round. And this leads to Bohr winning. So Bohr doing worse in the first round actually leads to him winning the election.
okay, but if Bohr was the one who had this hypothetical horrible speech and said bad policies that people don't like, then that would mean that most of the Curie voters it wouldn't split even. Most of the Curie voters would go to Einstein, because why would it split evenly if Bohr just made a really bad speech?
Clearly, this isn't something that we want in a voting system.
I'm so confused here.
Bohr in the second, she's more moderate. Now it's Curie that gets eliminated. proposes a very unpopular policy, so bad that some of his voters actually switch over to Einstein's side.
And why would his voters who are more opposed to that, wouldn't they switch to Curie? Because they're not just going to flip-flop completely.
Well, now it's Curie that gets eliminated. And because she's more moderate, half of her voters select Einstein and the other half select Bohr in the second round. And this leads to Bohr winning. So Bohr doing worse in the first round actually leads to him winning the election. Clearly, this isn't something that we want in a voting system.
I'm not feeling very smart right now.
This is what the French mathematician Condorcet also thought. Condorcet was one of the first people applying logic and mathematics to rigorously study voting systems, making him one of the founders of a branch of mathematics known as social choice theory. He was working during the time of the French Revolution, so fairly determining the will of the people was having a cultural moment right then. In 1784, Condorcet's contemporary at the French Royal Society of Science, Jean-Charles de Borda, proposed a voting method. You ask the voters to rank the candidates. If there are 5 candidates, ranking someone first gives that candidate 4 points. Ranking them second would give them 3, and so on, with 0 points being awarded for last place. But the Borda count has a problem, because the number of points given to each candidate is dependent on the total number of candidates. Adding extra people that have no chance of winning can affect the winner. Because of this, Condorcet that have no chance of winning dependent on the total number of candidates. Adding extra people that have no chance of winning can affect the winner. Because of this, Condorcet hated Borda's idea. He wrote that it was bound to lead to error because it relies on irrelevant factors for its judgments.
So in 1785, Condorcet published an essay in which he proposed a new voting system, one he thought was the most fair.
Basically, the winner needs to beat every other candidate in a head-to-head election. But with more than 2 candidates, do you need to hold a large number of head-to-head elections to pick the winner? Well, no. Just ask the voters to rank their preferences, just like in instant runoff, and then count how many voters rank each candidate higher than each other candidate. This feels like the most fair voting method. This voting system was actually discovered 450 years earlier by Raymond Lull, a monk who was looking at how church leaders were chosen. But Lull's ideas didn't make an impact because his book, Ars Electionis, The Art of Elections, was lost and only rediscovered in 2001. So the voting system is named after Condorcet and not Lull. But will there always be a
What if you just make it, and this, so no matter how many candidates they are, you tell voters they can only choose their top 3. You cannot choose more than 3. You can choose 1 if you want, or just choose their top 3, okay? And then you just rank them up, and you give first choice is 3 points, second choice is 2 points, third choice 1 point. And then you just add them up. Whoever gets the most first choices, you round them up, and like you compare all of the first choices they have, and then you get rid of you just add up the points, and whoever has the most points wins. For the 3 for first choice, 2 for second choice, third for 1 choice.
a winner in this way? let's try Condorcet's method for choosing dinner between you and two friends. There are three options: burgers, pizza, or sushi. You really like burgers, so that's your first preference. Your second choice is pizza, and you put sushi last. Your friend prefers pizza, then sushi, then burgers, and your other friend prefers sushi, then burgers, then pizza.
It's a tie.
Now, if you choose burgers, it can be argued that sushi should have won instead, since two of you prefer sushi over burgers, and only one prefers burgers to sushi. However, by the same argument, pizza is preferred to sushi, and burgers are preferred to pizza, by a margin of 2-1 on each occasion. So it seems like you and your friends are stuck in a loop. Burgers are preferred to pizza, which is preferred to sushi, which is preferred to burgers, and so on.
Rocks, paper, scissors. I don't know.
On each occasion. So it seems like you and your friends are stuck in a loop. Burgers are preferred to pizza, which is preferred to sushi, which is preferred to burgers, and so on. This situation is known as Condorcet's paradox. Condorcet died before he could resolve this problem with his voting system. He was politically active during the French Revolution, writing a draft of France's constitution. In 1793, during the Reign of Terror, when Le Montaigne came to power, he was deemed a traitor for criticizing the regime, specifically their new constitution. And the next year, he was arrested and died in jail. Over the next 150 years, dozens of mathematicians were proposing their own voting systems, or modifications to Condorcet's or Borda's ideas. One of those mathematicians was Charles Dodgson, better known as Lewis Carroll. When he wasn't
Alice in
writing Alice in
Wonderland?
Wonderland, he was trying to find a system to hold fair elections.
But every voting system had similar kinds of problems. You'd either get Condorcet loops, or other candidates that had no chance of winning would affect the outcome of the election.
In 1951, Kenneth Arrow published his PhD thesis, and in it he outlined 5 very obvious and reasonable conditions that a rational voting system should have. Condition number 1, if everyone in the group chooses one option over another, the outcome should reflect that. If every individual in the group prefers to eat sushi over pizza, then the group as a whole should prefer sushi over pizza. This is known as unanimity. Condition 2, no single person's vote should override the preferences of everyone else. If everyone votes for pizza except one person who votes for sushi, the group should obviously choose pizza. If a single vote is decisive, that's not a democracy, that's a dictatorship. Condition 3, everyone should be able to vote however they want, and the voting system must produce a conclusion for society based on all the ballots every time. It can't avoid problematic ballots or candidates by simply ignoring them, or just guessing randomly. It must reach the same answer for the same set of ballots every time. This is called unrestricted domain. Condition 4, the voting system should be transitive. If a group prefers burgers over pizza and pizza over sushi, then they should also prefer burgers over sushi. This is known as transitivity. Condition 5, if the preference of the group is sushi over pizza, the introduction of another option, like burgers, should not change that preference. Sure, the group might collectively rank burgers above both, or in the middle, or at the bottom, but the ranking of sushi over pizza should not be affected by the new option. This is called the independence of irrelevant alternatives. But
Okay.
here's the thing. Arrow proved that satisfying all 5 of these conditions in a ranked voting system with 3 or more candidates is impossible. This is Arrow's impossibility theorem, and it was so groundbreaking that Arrow was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1972. So I want to go through a version of his proof based on a formulation by Giannakopoulos.
So let's say there are 3 candidates running for election: Aristotle, Bohr, and Curie. But we'll refer to them as A, B, and C.
And we have a collection of voters that will line up in order. So we have voter 1, 2, 3, and so on, all the way up to N. Each of these voters is free to rank A, B, and C however they like. I'll even allow ties.
Now, the first thing we want to show is that if everyone ranks a particular candidate first or last, then society as a whole must also rank that candidate first or last.
Let's arbitrarily pick candidate B. If, say, half of the voters rank B first and half rank B last, then the claim is our voting system must put B either first or last. And we'll prove it by contradiction. So say this is how everyone voted.
Doesn't it change when you... hold on. So if you... So that means that C, or that A cannot be first? Let's say everyone votes A second and half vote B first last, or half vote. So everyone votes A in second, okay? Half of the people throw B in first, half of the people throw B in last, half of the people throw A in first, half throw A in last. Then at that point, all three candidates are equally preferable, aren't they? Everyone prefers A over either B or C, or everyone prefers A over B or C. Half people prefer C last and B first, and vice versa. And so by that justification, the population would equally prefer A, B, and C. Right? And at that point, I feel like you should just go with A. Just put A as first. You know? Because I feel like A would give the happiest result. You're either going to make half the population really angry and half really happy, or you can make everyone sort of meh. So in this case, I feel like you should just give it to A. Aristotle wins, all right?
If our system does not...
And this also doesn't take into account just how much you prefer A over B or B over C, right? Because it's three things. There should almost be like a rank them 1 to 6, but you only have 3 options. You can rank them 1, 2, 3. You can rank them 1, 3, 6. You can rank them 1. You should always have to rank them 1. But then to show how much more you prefer, you can go like, let's say you hate candidate B, you love candidate A, right? And you sort of like candidate. So you love candidate A, you're sort of like candidate B, but you hate candidate C. So you could rank A as your number 1 choice, B as your number 2, and then like C as your number 6, just to show your dissatisfaction, you know?
Put B first or last, but rather in the middle, say A is ranked above B, which is above C, then we'll get a contradiction. Because if each of our voters moved C above A, then by unanimity, C must be ranked above A. However, because we didn't change the position of any A relative to B, A must still be ranked above B. And because we didn't change the position of any C relative to B, change the position of any A relative to B.
So it's still the fact that these guys prefer B over A, and these guys still prefer A over B. So that's what he means there. But at this point, just C should win. Right?
A must still be ranked above B. And because we didn't change the position of any C relative to B, C must still be ranked below B. by transitivity, if A is preferred to B and B is preferred to C, then A must be ranked above C. But this contradicts the result by unanimity.
Well, how can A be ranked above B if A is only ranked above B by one position here, but B is ranked above A by 2 positions?
And that proves that if everyone ranks a candidate first or last, then society must also rank them first or last.
Now let's do a thought experiment where every voter puts B at the bottom of their ranking. We'll leave the ranking of A and C arbitrary.
Well then, by unanimity, we know that B must be at the bottom of society's ranking.
Yes.
And we'll call this setup Profile 0. Now, we'll create Profile 1, which is identical to Profile 0, except the first voter moves B from the bottom to the top. This, of course, doesn't affect the outcome, but we can keep doing this, creating Profiles 2, 3, 4, and so on, with one more voter flipping B from the bottom to the top each time. If we keep doing this, there will eventually come a voter whose change from having B at the bottom to B at the top will first flip society's ranking, moving B to the top. There will eventually come a voter whose change from having B at the bottom to B at the top will first flip society's ranking, moving B to the top. Let's call this voter the pivotal voter, and we'll label the profile Profile P. Profile O is then the profile right before the pivotal change happens. Let's now create a profile Q, which is the same as P, except the pivotal voter moves A above B. By independence of irrelevant alternatives, the social rank must also put A above B. Since for all of our voters, the relative position of A and B is the same as it was in Profile O. And B must be ranked above C, because the relative positions of B and C are the same as they were in Profile P, where our pivotal voter moved B to the top. By transitivity, A must be ranked above C.
So because all of these guys tied A and C, and these guys tied A and C, but this guy didn't tie. He put A at the top, and so that's this one person will decide it, but I don't see anything wrong with
in
that.
The social ranking. This is true regardless of how any of the non-pivotal voters rearrange their positions of A and C, because these rearrangements don't change the position of A relative to B or C relative to B.
This means the pivotal voter is actually a dictator for determining society's preference of A over C.
No, he's not. No, he's not, though, because he didn't know the result. And so just because one person, no, he's not a dictator. His vote was the pivotal vote, but nobody knew what other people were voting. And so just because he happened to be the one whose vote changed everything, that doesn't make him a dictator. That just means the votes were counted where they were, and mathematically, because of this voter, they win. How is that dictator?
The social rank will always
He dictated the election, but didn't know he was dictating the election.
agree with the pivotal voter regardless of A over C. The social rank will always agree with the pivotal voter regardless of what the other voters do. We can run a similar thought experiment where we put C at the bottom and prove that there is again a dictator who, in this case, determines the social preference of A over B.
And it turns out this voter is the same one who determines the social preference for A over C.
The pivotal voter is therefore a complete dictator. So,
am I missing something? What is wrong with that? Even if you want to call him a dictator, the votes were counted, and that's what they were. Nobody knew that they would be the one that was different from all the other ones. It's like saying that it's a problem that the election comes down to only a few states, right? That's not a problem. It's just the fact that those are the few states that are pivotal. If any other state in the country, okay, was much more close in what they're going to decide, right? Then they would also be just as important as that pivotal vote, right? I think that's a big... Michigan and Pennsylvania aren't so important to American elections more so than others that are hard blue or hard red because something special or dictatorial is about those states. It's just those states just happen to be the swing states. They just happen to be it.
Is democracy doomed? Well, Arrow's impossibility theorem seems to say so. If there are 3 or more candidates to choose from, there is no ranked choice method to rationally aggregate voter preferences.
Only let them vote for 3.
You always need to give something up. But the mathematician Duncan Black found a much more optimistic theorem, which might actually represent reality better. If voters and candidates are naturally spread along a single dimension, say ranging from liberal on the left to conservative on the right, but this could apply to any other political dimension, well then, Black showed that the preference of the median voter will reflect the majority decision.
The median voter's choice will often determine the outcome of the election, a result that aligns with the majority of voters, avoiding the paradoxes and inconsistencies highlighted by Arrow. And there's more good news. Arrow's impossibility theorem only applies to ordinal voting systems, ones in which the voters rank candidates over others. There is another way: rated voting systems. The simplest version is known as approval voting, where instead of ranking the candidates, the voters just tick the candidates they approve of.
Why not combine it? Why not just rate the candidates you want to rate? That way, that your least favorite choice isn't even counted towards it. If you only vote for 2 people and both of them go out, then those votes are gone, right? I don't see that as undemocratic. I see that as just vote people, rank them 1 to 6, but the ones that aren't ranked at all just get 0 points.
There are also versions where you could indicate how strongly you like each candidate, say from -10 strongly disapprove of to +10 strongly approve.
Research has found that approval voting increases voter turnout, decreases negative campaigning, and prevents the spoiler effect. Voters could express their approval for a candidate without worrying about the size of the party they're voting for.
It's also simple to tally. Just count up what percentage of the voters approve of each candidate, and the one with the highest approval wins.
Kenneth Arrow was initially skeptical of rated voting systems, but toward the end of his life, he agreed that they were likely the best method.
Approval voting is not new. It was used by priests in the Vatican to elect the Pope between 1294 and 1621. It's also used to elect the Secretary General of the United Nations. But it hasn't been widely used in large-scale elections, and so more real-world testing is likely required.
So is democracy mathematically impossible? Well, yes, if we use ranked choice methods of voting, which is what most countries in the world use to elect their leaders. And some methods are clearly better at aggregating the people's preferences than others. The use of first-past-the-post voting feels, quite frankly, ridiculous to me, given all of its flaws. But just because things aren't perfect doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Being interested in the world around us, caring about issues, and being politically engaged is important.
I sort of disagree on that. I don't love, it's probably my least favorite that has been gone over. But I don't think first past the post is flawed because of why they say it's flawed. It's kind of calling voters dumb if you think it's flawed, right? If you go in knowing what the system is, then you know that putting your vote on someone that might not win or likely won't win will make it more likely for the person you really don't want to go in, or it makes it so that the person who you would rather get in for the other two that you're not voting for, it will make it like your vote that likely won't matter here could have gone to this guy to avoid the worst case scenario. That's a calculation that I think any educated voter knows that they will make. And so I think this kind of is like telling the voter, oh, they're too stupid to know that if they vote for the third party candidate, that's a vote that could have gone to the least worst option. And now you got the other one in. So I sort of disagree there.
First past the post voting feels quite frankly ridiculous to me, given all of its flaws. But just because things aren't perfect doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Being interested in the world around us, caring about issues, and being politically engaged is important. It might be one of the few ways we can make a real difference in the world. Like Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government.
Except for all the others.
Except for all the other forms that have been tried. Democracy is not perfect, but it's the best thing we've got. The game might be crooked, but it's the only game in town.
Not like capitalism or something. It's really interesting. Love you all. I feel like that was a little confusing at points, but I feel like I did okay for my expectation. Would appreciate any comments down below. I would love to hear what you guys think. If I said something incorrect, would love for you to correct me or answer any questions I had. Love y'all. Hopefully I'll see you next video. Bye, guys.